It is a protest movement born of controversy that now finds itself mired in the same. As Black Lives Matter becomes a phrase heard in households across this country, there are growing questions about the group's goals, its methods, and what Americans really think about its increasingly confrontational activists. Welcome to a Kelly File special on the Black Lives Matter protests. I'm Megyn Kelly. It began back in 2012 when an unarmed black teenager by the name of Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman, a neighborhood watch volunteer. While Zimmerman was eventually acquitted, the incident inspired America's first black president to suggest that African Americans look at these kinds of issues through a, quote, different set of experiences. A little over a year later, another young black man by the name of Michael Brown was shot in Ferguson, Missouri, killed by a white police officer who was never charged by the grand jury and who was ultimately exonerated by the Department of Justice. By the time that officer's name was cleared, the movement had already accepted the narrative that cops killing young black Americans had become an epidemic. And indeed, cases continued to make the headlines. Eric Garner, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, to name just a few. Police were found not responsible in most of these cases, but those results were questioned. And soon the protests took on a more confrontational tone. Chants of Black Lives Matter started being mixed with messages aimed straight at police, such as, what do we want? Dead cops. When do we want them? Now. Also, pigs in a blanket. Fry 'em like bacon. We just heard that one. Sure enough, in December, 2 cops were executed in New York City by someone seeking revenge for the police shootings highlighted by the media. More recently, these protesters have been seen storming the stages at presidential campaign stops and were even offered an endorsement from the Democratic National Committee, which, by the way, they rejected. Then in Texas, a cop is gunned down for no apparent reason while filling his cruiser with gasoline. The man accused of the murder is black, and the months of quiet frustration on the part of some police departments has since gone very public.
Our system of justice absolutely requires law enforcement to be present to protect our community. So at any point when the rhetoric ramps up to the point where calculated, cold-blooded assassination of police officers happened, this rhetoric has gotten out of control. We've heard Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Well, cops' lives matter too. So why don't we just drop the qualifier and just say lives matter and take that to the bank?
As a community, we say so often. There's a theme that do Black Lives Matter? And at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, do all lives matter? Regardless of race, creed, color, economic status, what profession that person holds, all lives matter.
You know, you got all of these different groups saying Black Lives Matter, police lives matter, all lives matter.
And here we have a movement with hundreds of people standing behind a Black Lives Matter banner, discrediting themselves. They've done it before. When is it time for senior administration officials to discredit them as well? These are people who are tugging as hard as they can and tearing at the fabric of trust between our community and law enforcement. It's time to push them to the margins.
The disgusting nature that this movement has taken, it's the slime that I talk about. But then again, Megyn, they have the same attitude about black on black crime, no big deal, you know, nothing to see here. I think the President of the United States, because he waded into this in the days after Ferguson with some inflammatory rhetoric, where he breathed life into this anti-cop sentiment that now exists in the United States. He made the statement that our law enforcement officers have a fear of people that don't look like them.
Tonight, we will speak with a panel of Americans on all sides of this debate. We'll take a look at what the protesters want, what the politicians are doing, how we got to this place, and the pushback the protests are now getting from some corners in the black community. Welcome to you all. We've got cops here, we've got activists here, we've got lawyers here, so we wanted to hear directly from you. Let's start with the point that the police officers were making on the Kelly File and other shows this week, which is that they believe the Black Lives Matter protest group has now delegitimized itself thanks to actions like pigs in a blanket, fry 'em like bacon. Bill Stanton, you're a former cop. You tell me what you think.
Well, what I see here, Megyn, is self-segregation and soft racism. What do I mean? Black lives matter, all lives matter. They are literally segregating themselves. And what do I mean by soft racism? That racism is against the color blue. And now it's a soft endorsement to any fringe group or nut to take a life of a cop, and that's not good for anyone.
Does anyone disagree with that?
I totally disagree with that.
You were right there. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean,
Claudio.
I think I take issue first and foremost with this constant refrain that all lives matter. Of course, all lives matter. But the only reason why we have to say that black lives matter is because traditionally in this country, they have been the lives that have been devalued. If I go into a doctor with a knee injury to the ER and I say, you know what, my knee is, what's the matter with you? My knee matters. And the doctor says, well, you know what, I need to check out every single part of your body because your whole body matters. That's not helpful. I mean, we're focusing on a specific issue, and I think that to say that all lives matter is, yes, it's a kind of sine qua non. It's like, all right, cool, we understand that all lives matter, but end of the day, when we're looking at what's going on in America, it doesn't seem to be the case.
Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, it's based on a false premise, this whole idea of all lives matter. And certainly, if all lives really truly did matter, then we wouldn't be talking about Black Lives Matter tonight. The thing that bothers me is it's kind of like the equivalent of saying you're pro-life, but then only being pro-birth. And in other words, once you come out of the womb, you're irrelevant. Your life is irrelevant. According to some politicians who believe that, child care and education and higher ed and other things, that's a secondary thought. Doesn't matter. And when you have...
Do you think it diminishes the Black Lives Matter movement to say all lives matter?
I do. I think it's disingenuous.
You think so too? Renata?
Absolutely.
You're saying yes?
All lives are supposed to matter, but all lives are not being killed by police disproportionately. All lives are not being stopped and frisked by police. All lives are not being, brutalized by police. I think people are focusing on the name of the movement, Black Lives Matter, as opposed to focus on the message of the movement, which is to end police brutality and to end racial injustice within the criminal justice system.
Darren, go ahead.
As a prior police lieutenant and an African-American male, I understand the movement. However, when officers are being killed and this rhetoric is being spread, something needs to be done. And this campaign is going on, but something has to come to amends. We need to mend these fences between police and community. This Black Lives Matter movement hasn't been doing that.
What do you think? I mean, the cops who were coming on the show this week expressed genuine, if not fear, concern, real concern for members of the police community, given the rhetoric that we are hearing. And, that pigs in a blanket, fry 'em like bacon thing, that's exactly what the guy who executed those two cops posted online on social media the morning before he killed them. So those words are potentially incendiary. Are the cops right to be afraid, to be concerned? Randy, you go in the back.
I think the proof is in the pudding. Look what's going on here. And what I keep thinking about is, how would Dr. King respond to what's going on? 1955, Montgomery, what did he write about? I will outthink you, I will outpersuade you, I will outspirit you, I will outlove you. I will not be violent. I will not threaten, because that's not the way to solve the problem. I will turn you around because I will let you punch yourself out, and then I will hug you.
Does anybody worry about... Go ahead. Sorry. Biko.
Hi, Megan. My name is Miss Biko, and I'm from the great state of Ohio, and I believe that all lives will matter when Black lives matter. What we're seeing is, I think it's going to get worse, and the police ought to be afraid. When we're hearing reports that every 28 hours a black person is murdered by police, it feels like we're in a war. It feels like we're under occupation. And when we know that the police here are sending over their people to places like Palestine to get trained by the Israeli government on how to occupy folks worse than they already are.
What do you mean police ought to be concerned? What are you saying by that?
That it feels like we're in a war. People keep bringing up Dr. Martin Luther King, but that didn't work.
Right. That's how it sounds. Is it a threat?
Exactly. I mean, you totally just threaten the police. And I understand, some of the stuff that you're saying. There was a time in this country where the police were sort of the agents to thwart any sort of social change, whether, you're talking about Bull Connor in the South, where the police were trying to enforce a status quo. That is not the world that we live in today. And probably the best evidence of that is the fact that we have now gay marriage as the law of the land of this country. We are not living in the same world that we lived in before. The police are here to protect us. And, making idle threats to people, and actually they're not idle anymore. I mean, making terroristic threats to anybody, especially police officers, I think is just wrong.
Joelle, you're right next to it. Go ahead.
My name is Joelle Gamble. I'm the daughter of a police officer. He served on the LAPD for 25 years, including during Rodney King. And while I think police need to be respected and should be held to the highest standard, the Black Lives Matter protesters have a point. And getting caught up in the names and these threats is not going to get us to a solution. We need to start talking about policy changes.
You think it was a mistake? Pigs in a blanket, fry 'em like blanket?
Of course,
a mistake.
That is a mistake. but that does not devalue what this movement is talking about.
But that's the loudest voice that's being heard. I'm sure there's some wonderful people that are involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, but the fact is, all of those voices of reason are being drowned out by people who are making those appalling, heinous statements.
Stacey, in the back. Stacey,
Washington. I'm a radio host, and I'm also the daughter of a police officer. And I can tell you one thing. When I look at the Black Lives Matter movement and I want to identify with it, I want to join into the cause, I can't join in with a movement that talks about killing someone when I know what my father went through for 25 years and is still going through every day carrying the gun and the badge. They are killing the idea that they can co-opt and gather in support by using tactics that offend and repel the people they want to.
How about, does anybody here worry, people who are in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, are you worried at all about the skyrocketing murder rates we are seeing in major saying is in part they believe due to the threats that are being made to police officers and the prosecutions we're seeing of police officers, or the threats of prosecution which don't wind up being valid, because cops are now worried about doing their jobs. Go ahead, Mike.
First thing I'd like to address, one of the panelists said that blacks are being murdered, 700 a year by cops. There are deaths at the hands of police. These deaths happen for a reason. Cops aren't going out and they're purposely murdering people. They're defending themselves.
Most cops are not.
Like I said, they're defending themselves, they're defending other people, and they repulse a threat to them. They have means available to them, they have to use them.
It's 230.
There's always going to be.
Okay, go ahead, Rocco.
Hi, Rocco Limatone. There's always going to be a situation where an officer shoots someone by accident. I mean, these guys are coming out. My father was in law enforcement for 25 years. These guys are coming out there. They don't know if they're going to go home at night. And this whole Black Lives Matters movement, Blue Lives Matters movement, White Lives Matters movement, when you start segregating all these different movements, we're only asking for trouble. Because it really boils down to, and a couple of people didn't agree with all lives matter, but it really does come down to all lives matter. So you can't segregate all these different races because we are one people. First of all,
and yet that is what the politicians in particular are being asked to weigh in on, and we're going to pick this up because Black Lives Matter has been a very hot button issue on the 2016 campaign trail already, as protesters disrupt events and candidates are asked to weigh in on the movement and this language. So how should the politicians handle what some are now calling, this is the critics' position, a, quote, hate group? That issue's next.
Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket.